give it to the Catholic Church?
He felt he was done with the property, but he didn't want, he wanted it to continue to be something good for the community. So he was going to give it to the Catholic Church through some contact with some lady that lived on Higgins Lake. Well, I was on the school board at that time, and I took him to St. Helen one day just for a ride with me because I was checking out the core and rock operation was in St. Helen, right by the railroad track. And I took him into there and showed him what the handicapped people were accomplishing and how they were being educated, and saw the facility that they had to work in and didn't like it. And, so I said, you know, you got to, why don't you think about this? So that's how he ended up.
Great. So you were very instrumental in that.
Well, you know, that was a big growth time for the school. And when I was on the school board, we did the high school, did a school in St. Helen, remodeled the elementary and middle school, got rid of the one downtown, and there was a lot of stuff going. And then the core thing was all, you know, it was all an intricate part of the educational system. And he realized the value that those people deserved, you know, a chance to do better.
Sure.
And so, and it's worked out perfect.
Beautiful. Yes, it certainly has. It certainly has.
So.
Did you say you were a teacher?
No.
At one point? No. So you came in the 6th grade, then
Right.
where were you going to school then? All the school was in the brick building in town?
Mid Craft Center.
How did you get there from out at DeWitt Landing?
Well, we had a school bus.
You had a bus already?
Right, and then, in fact, Squire Mead was our bus driver for years and years. Which he was also the mayor of town once, and you know, the Mead family has, you know, been a big part of this community. He was the mechanic at the bus garages right across the street, you know, from you guys. And then also, as soon as we could look like we might be old enough to drive, we drove, and we had a Jeep, and we could take the back roads to town. We were probably 13 years old, no more than that. And then it was just my Jerry and John, two younger brothers, and we'd take the back roads to town. And the reason for that was because then when we got out of school, we had to come here and clean the mill and stack firewood and do chores. The old man had this all figured out, is saying, you can drive to school, but then you're going to drive home by the way of the workshop. So, but a lot of kids were driving then that didn't have a driver's license.
What kind of car did you have? Oh, you said a Jeep.
I think a Jeep, and you know, which was.
Did your mother drive?
Oh yes, oh yes. She drove from Pontiac. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
she's the one that brought us back. You know, Dad kind of just came and went, and Mother was up here with us all summer.
Came all summer for the whole
Right,
summer.
and then Dad would go back and forth to Pontiac yet. So.
Let's get back to your dad's hunting interest, because it sounds like he was a really big hunter.
He loved to hunt. I mean, he took me hunting for a couple years before I could get a license. But he says, you know, you're old enough to have a gun, so come on, we're going to go hunting. And so, and we went out in the oil fields, and we went all over heck, and we'd see. There was a doe season in there, I remember, and people were slaughtering deer. That was really a bad hunting season. People were just shooting, and leaving them. A lot, you know, if they shot two, you know, they were only supposed to have one, so they'd leave one. Well, we'd pick those deer up if they're a couple days old, and they were getting pretty ripe. But that was his butcher skills, and he'd bring them in here, and we'd salvage something from them. And so some of them wasn't a pretty sight, but it worked, and nobody died, so nobody even got sick. But then he'd come to our cabin. A group of us from here with my two brothers bought a cabin in Lewiston for our hunting cabin, and he'd come over there. We bought that in 1970. That would have put him at 76 years old, and he was there at 5:30, and we didn't get up till 6. Now he'd already had an hour or better of driving and whatever at that age, and he'd stay right up till supper, and he wouldn't stay overnight with us because he didn't want to curtail our activities with the movies and whatever we were going to have going on. So then he'd drive back home, and the next morning he'd be back up there.
He was a good shot, I bet.
Very good shot. He was he was the president of the Pontiac Gun Club, president of the Oakland County Sportsman's Club, was a skeet shooter, a trap shooter, was a state champion handicap with his handicap for his trap and skeet. My older brothers always said they never could figure out where he got all the ammunition during the war to continue to shoot. They said he must have shot up a carload of shells when nobody else could buy a box of bullets. They all went to the war effort. But
he was a very ambitious person, though.
He had his routine, but he put in a lot of hours every day. Every night at 6 o'clock we ate dinner, and at 6:30 we were done, and at 6:30 till 7:30 he took a nap, and then worked till 11 o'clock at night, doing something on his garden or yard or something. No, he had a lot of energy.
I guess he did. And very, you'd almost say philanthropist, I think is the word. Okay, tell us about, he built, about the big wheel.
Well, how he ever got a hold of that property, I don't know, but he realized the fact that that was probably the most exposed property to people heading north of any property around, as it was at the junction of the then US 27 and M76, and if you were going to go up mid-state, you had to go by that corner. Everybody I was in the Army with a number of guys, and they'd say, Roscommon, we used to go through Roscommon. I said, you ever stop at the big wheel? Hell yes. When we went deer hunting, we had to stop at the big wheel. Everybody would,
sure,
you know.
Sure.
That was a little gold mine, really.
Who ran it then?
He brought up two cousins from Wyandotte, Reichelderfer and Arnie Malron, and they were both from my mother's side of the family, and they operated the gas station, whatever, and then he leased out the restaurant part to a number of different people, but they had very good food and whatever. And, you know, I think maybe one of the main things he built that restaurant for is to get the garbage from there to feed his hogs back here, because that was my job, to go up there and get a couple cans of garbage almost every day and bring them back and slop the hogs.
No,
Yeah.
How many hogs did he raise?
There was probably 80 back here at one time.
And that was on the farm at
Right here.
Oh, that was on this farm?
Oh, that was long before that stuff.
Oh, okay.
That farm only
And where
never.
did all this, was all this, the meat then, did that all get sold back in Pontiac?
No.
Where
It
did
couldn't.
that go?
Through the family and you know, some people in town and
Oh, okay.
whatever. Just we only butchered.
How many of you learned the butchering?
Well, my brother Bill was a good butcher. I'm a decent butcher. My dad never thought I was a very good butcher because I butchered to eat and he butchered to sell. There's a lot of difference, as he tried to teach me, is that you know, I can make a cut of meat that is very good to eat, but you're not going to get top dollar out of that if you ran it through the meat counter. You know, you could do better with 2 pieces of that, and you know, there's a whole lot of theory in there that
And he was so business-minded that was his.
yeah, he couldn't get that out of his head when it was back here for enjoyment, you know, or for our own personal use. He still had to cut for a profit. So, and he was a good butcher, and he could outwork anybody.
Whatever happened to all that butchering equipment?
It's all back here, yeah.
No kidding.
There's meat block and cutting tables and
Probably set up a museum.
there's a yard. We rendered lard and made cracklings, and then head cheese and scrapple and all that stuff. I mean, everything was used from the hog except the squeal. That was his theory. And we had a smokehouse out back. He smoked his own hams and you know, cured.
But not to sell? Just
No,
for
just
you all to use.
yeah.
Well, you had a big family.
You know, Cornelia's in the bakery downtown, and R. Vossling had the market and a bakery on the corner. They just loved when we butchered because they could get fresh lard, you know, good clean lard for their bakery and stuff system. And
So he did sell a little bit of it locally.
no, they gave it to them.
Oh, we gave it to them.
Yeah, oh my, we did the rendering to get the crackling and make the head cheese and the scrapple. And then the log cabin company was still in, you know, in operation all this time, you know. No, these are just little side things. The salesman used to come in here, and he always gave them a slab of head cheese and a little piece of scrapple. And some of the guys, my wife was his secretary for a while before, even while we were married. And she'd say there was a couple of those guys just almost hated to come in here because they didn't want any of that stuff.
They were going to receive it anyway.
They were going to get it, and you better like it or you don't get the next order. So.
Wow. Okay, well, let's go on to, he built the big wheel, then eventually sold that too, or what happened to that?
Yeah, it was sold. I forget. Sold it to a guy out of Clare. I had a heck of a time getting our money out of that. In fact, settled for a lot less, and then right now today it's used as the Moose Lodge.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
oh,
which
okay.
They had a tough time for a while, but it appears that they're doing very, very good now.
Great.
So.
Okay, and then let's go on to the Bank Building Mile. Is that a log cabin?
No,
structure
it was all masonry,
Uh-huh.
but I don't know. He had this vision and feeling that Mile was a good place to do business, and he was so, as you know, as one of the bigger stockholders in the bank, he wanted the bank to do as good a job as it could, and he wanted to expand that market, which he talked the bank into expanding in the Houghton Lake and Prudenville area. But they just wouldn't have anything to do with that, and they didn't want to spend the money to build a building, so he built the building and leased it back to them, and it was a gangbusters. I mean, it was, it's always been a good moneymaker part of the bank, and...
we're talking about the Roscommon State Bank.
Right.
This was in 50 and 51. Okay. So tell me a little bit about this, even the Amish people coming.
Well, see, you know, during the Depression, everybody in the Mile and Rose City area, their bank was in West Branch.
So there was a bank there that was a branch from West Branch?
No, they had to go to West Branch.
Oh, they had to go to West Branch. Oh.
But that bank failed during the Depression, as a lot of other small banks did.
Yeah.
And so he felt that that community deserved that. So he did this building, and when they opened up, the people brought their money in and they buried the money. I mean, that was their only, you know, and they hid it in the barn and in the chicken coops and whatever, and they brought it in, and the guys that worked there said, God, there was feathers on the cans and when white marks where the chickens had roosted, and it was really, and it just chucked right full of money because they're very frugal people to start with.
Sure.
And good business people. They work hard and
Sure.
don't spend a lot, so
Sure. Huh.
it was, so that proved the rest of the board wrong, and he took great joy in that also. So
Sure. Well,
I
something
told
to
you,
be
I
proud
told
of.
you so.
Yeah, right. And then give us the history of this. Was it the Price building when your father bought it?
Yeah, that
Or
was,
what was it?
Andrew Price was,
This was in 52 and 53.
Andrew Price was the county treasurer here for,
Long
if
time.
there is 100 years for a guy, I think it was. I mean, I just could never remember anybody that
Besides
before him.
Mhm.
And he owned that building, and it was I think it was a feed store, mercantile,
Right.
you know,
We're talking
general
about the
store.
building on Lake Street that is now the Ace Hardware.
Ace Hardware, right,
Okay.
which is the two-story
Part.
part of that building. And then upstairs there was a pool hall, and there was a side stairway that went up the side towards the riverside. Went up
Outside,
the
you mean?
outside to gain access to the pool room upstairs.
Oh, okay.
It's a huge room upstairs. It's a big wide open space with a, you know, with nice wooden floor and whatever in there. So I guess they pretty well closed down, and so Dad just had this idea again that
Was Mr. Price still alive then?
I think Andy was. I'm not. Andy lived till ripe old age. I'm not sure, but Andy lived right up the street from you guys, where
Or Darlene and
Arlene and Dave live.
Mhm.
That's a Sears house. Was bought from Sears in a package, and so they bought that little restaurant next door, and Cornelius, who were friends of his in Pontiac, wanted to move up here, and he hunted some with Art, so he built them a bakery and an addition on the store and filled that block up that way. And
Oh, so the restaurant, there was an open spot between the restaurant and Price's building,
yep,
and that's where they filled in with the bakery?
right.
Oh, okay.
That was like the bakery in between there was kind of a freestanding building.
Uh-huh.
You know, the Roscommon State Bank was on the corner,
Yeah,
which,
the brick building.
yeah, my brother Jerry and I owned that for a lot of years. But that was the original Roscommon State Bank. And so,
What's the one they built? It wasn't the first one. According to Percy's history, the first one was where the El Sabo drugstore is now. Yeah, we have old pictures
Okay.
from the 1880s.
right, okay, but that was the first,
Not 1880, earlier than, it was 1900 something.
yeah, okay. But it became
But I know where right.
the Roscommon State Bank
Right.
before they moved to on the corner down where
Right.
where the Bank One is at now. And so that he just kind of filled between the two buildings, you know, built an addition onto the Price building, and then
The
a
restaurant
separate,
was there.
right.
The little restaurant was there already, there's Beery's.
Well, but it was there, then he tore that out of there. That was
Oh, okay.
demolished.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't incorporated into this thing. I mean,
Oh,
everything
yeah,
that's there is
that's here.
masonry now, you know.
I see. So he filled in where the restaurant was and the empty spot and made the
Right.
bakery.
Right.
Wow. Boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a bakery now?
Oh,
So then Art.
people would die today to have Eloise and Art baking for them. I'll tell you, they had a beautiful bakery.
Did they really? Wow.
They ran a bakery in Pontiac. That's how Dad knew them from down there. So.
Sure. Then your father opened that building as a furniture store.
Yep.
Called the Price Mart.
Named it the Price Mart, which took Andy's building, but Mart was.
Right. But Andy was not part of that anymore then?
No.
Okay.
And then my brother Jerry managed that from very young, really, probably 1955 or something. Mm-hmm. He didn't graduate till 53. He went to college one year, I think, and then started running that for Dad, and worked there for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And in fact, then he started, and there was a mezzanine in there, mm-hmm. and he started the credit union for the, which is now the credit union there. And then when we bought the building from NBD, that still had teller cages and what in there, and so he moved the credit union into that part, and then it operated there more like a bank, you know, then, and then moved to where they're located at now. And so, but that store did a very good business in furniture and.
When did it become a gambling store?
Oh boy, I don't know, but
Is that after Jerry?
Oh yeah.
Sold it? Did Jerry sell it then? Or
no, Jerry never owned it.
Your dad sold
it? It just that I guess you know, Van Dries and those things started taking over to where, and Jerry moved to Saginaw to run a credit union. He was involved in credit union, so he didn't want to be part of the furniture store anymore. So I think that's pretty well why it just shut down, and then had the gamble store in there for a while, and then, you know, then we sold it to, we got it back from that, sold it to Dave and Sandy Myers, and
so the DeWitt still owned it when David Sandy Myers bought it?
Kenny Hellebuck and his wife, mm-hmm. and then they changed it into the hardware store.
Yeah, they were very successful.
I think we're very lucky to have. That's a heck of a hardware store for this little town. I'll tell you that. The stocking and stuff and those guys put in there is fantastic. You know, they do a good job, I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the Catholic Church that your father had a hand in building.
Well, see, my dad was a convert. He when raised a Protestant. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't think anything. But her family was Catholic, and of course when they got married, it was in the Catholic Church. And then, you know, a convert to Catholicism is a different animal altogether. I mean, they seem to have a more intense love. And he was a Catholic, I'll tell you, and he'd do anything for the church. Mm-hmm. He thought that was heaven. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. He's buying his way to heaven. But anyhow, the little wooden church that was on the corner, that wasn't adequate anymore, and I think Father Grill came here and said, you know, we got to have something more. He agreed, and away we went. And that was our first timber building.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I mean, we were still in the round log business, mm-hmm. but that just wasn't fitting for the community, for a church.
Okay, so they wanted a new church.
Right, so he made some contacts in British Columbia, out there, to get the redwood timbers, and that was our first exposure to timber work. It was quite a project to start from that
it was.
type of construction from scratch, and he designed those trusses, and he had a little model there's one around here someplace of how to stress those trusses in that building, and it was quite a work of art at that, you know, and of course now it's expanded, and who was Father John? Yeah, Father. He was here, and he and I talked a lot, and I did some remodeling there for him. Made one of those side things into more. It used to have columns in the middle of the side rooms. I took one of those columns out, restructured the upstairs so that it could span that full opening, and did some other things. And Father John and I got along just great, which he was a great guy. And then they got into the idea that they needed to expand this church, and so. And I talked to him about how it was constructed and this and that and the other thing, and he said, I got to talk to my committee to see if you can be on the building committee with us. He said, I need you. So he came out here and talked to me a number of times. So then he went back to the building committee at the church, at a church meeting, and they said, Tom doesn't go to church, he can't be on the committee. And so he came out here, and he was madder than hell, and he said, those dummies, it doesn't matter if you go to church or not, you're smarter than all of them. So, but they wouldn't let me, but he and I helped him to say, here's what you can preserve and whatever, and I think they wanted to gut a lot more of it than they did, and he wouldn't let them. So it's
So
at
you
least
had a big influence
at least it stayed. The nucleus of that thing is like it used to be. So.
Okay, so what happened to the building that was there when this timber one was built?
Well, it was moved a couple times in town, down towards Beatway's house first, and then over by France's car sales, which at that time was by McWilliams's barber shop and whatever. And then it went out on.
Was it just vacant there, or did someone use it for something?
Caroline, I can't really, I can't
okay,
remember. During some of this period of time, I was out of town too, maybe, but then I ended up, I'm positive, out on Oakwood by the high school, someplace out there.
We'll have to research that.
I'm gonna take a ride out there, and I would recognize it if I could see it. I know it was there at one time. Whether it's still existing, I'm not sure.
It probably was used as a private home out there.
Yeah, I think it was storage and maybe a garage even. I'm not sure.
Okay. And then he built in St. Helen.
Yeah, he had a few friends, and of course the bank moved into St. Helen, and there was the post office was, I guess, almost non-existent down there, and so he built a building across from where Bank One is at today. It's a masonry there's a little bit of timber work. Everything we've ever done has got some timber work or something in it. And there was a beauty shop in there and a post office, and that was the post office for a number of years before they moved across the street down towards the railroad tracks a little ways.
And what about this the elks?
Well, he was a dyed-in-the-wool elk. He loved the elks. And I think all of those organizations used to do more work for the community, within the community service type stuff than they do today. and he liked the camaraderie and what they stood for and whatever. So
Sure.
he talked them into starting back. They'd failed, I guess. I'm not sure of some of, but they weren't functioning as a lodge. So he made it possible for them to meet and use the part of the sports park
Oh,
for
at Pioneer Hill.
at Pioneer Hills for a lodge room, for a meeting room, and whatever. And then during that period of time, I know that date's pretty close because during that period of time I turned 21, and on the day after my birthday I became an elk because the membership was going up, and so I was going to help that. And then he got with the business guys in Houghton Lake that that's where it should have, it was their lodge really. And then again, he talked them in and helped them buy what they called a Houghton Lake Hospital, which was probably a health clinic more than a hospital. But it was like a 2-story building on the property where the Elks Lodge is at today.
Which is on the lake.
It's on the lake, yes. Nice piece of property. And again, he said, now I'm going to Florida, and so here's what you're going to do to remodel that thing, and he left town.
You got to do it, huh?
And here I was the young guy on the block, and all these businessmen and Elks guys in Houghton Lake, they knew. A couple of them I got along with, and they went to bat for me, but some of them said, what the hell's that kid doing running this job? But it got done, and it served well until they were in a financial situation to do bigger and better things, which they have done.
Yeah.
But he loved them, that Elks thing. He always had a car lot. He'd make sure he'd go through town and pick up 3 or 4 of the Elks and make sure they made it to the meetings and stuff.
Right.
So he
It's just amazing what all he did, isn't it? Just amazing.
had a lot of energy.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the wooden cross in Indian River. Where
Well,
did
that-
those timbers come from?
They came from like British Columbia or on the West Coast someplace, but most of that timber stuff came from British Columbia, and I don't know why. But Father Grill was the pastor here then, and he had some kind of a relationship with the priest at Indian River, and they had this dream of a chapel in the woods and thought, and they had a smaller idea for a cross than it ended up, but I think that's how it came to life. And so they contacted Dad, and he said, that's a great idea. So we were buying carloads of timbers at that time that we were using in the business. So he had some really good contacts out there. And I know the company that he bought that came from Seattle, which I think still had a logging operation in British Columbia possibly, which would be on the border there anyhow. And that, I think the main log is 56 feet long, the upright, and the vertical, or the horizontal, the cross eye is like 32 foot long or something. It all came out of one tree.
Okay.
And
So that's redwood, I imagine.
that's all redwood. And I had a picture, and I don't know what's happened to it, of the stump. There was like 8 guys standing across the stump where they'd cut this tree down, and then there was no sawmill that could handle that, so they squared it up with saws, I guess 2-man chainsaws or whatever. I'm not sure how they did it, but it came in on a car. I got a picture up there of it after we unloaded it off the railroad car. And then we worked on it through the mill, and had to come up with some really ingenious handling things to turn it over and to handle it, and then shipped it up there and
How did you get it up there?
trucked it up with like a pipe hauling trailer, which is just a piece of pipe with a bunk on it, and behind a big truck, and
That was in 54 and 55.
yes.
Okay.
Well, I think it was actually constructed like in 56, but
So did your crew actually put it upright and install it and all that?
well, not really. They had to get a crane from Roy Milliken.
They were helping to do it,
Yeah.
though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But Roy Milliken, which was up by Grayling, in part way up to Grayling, he had a crane, and so he worked with it and worked on it. But when they got it up there, they couldn't get it up because his crane wasn't big enough. They had to bring a crane up from Chicago to set this thing. That was the closest place to find a crane that was big enough, with a big enough boom to set that thing up.
Wow.
Because it's on a knoll to start with.
Yeah.
So I stopped by there a couple years ago with our neighbors from Florida. I was showing them around some stuff, and they painted that thing gold, and it looks like hell.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Well, is the statue of Christ still on it?
Yeah, that came as an after thing. It was built just as and then the priest up there was more of a, he went to some commercialized Christian idea and could market it better with a crucifix on it. Didn't need to, but
Originally, it was just going to be the cross.
it was just the cross for a while, and then they put the thing on it.
Wow, well, that's something that and your father probably contributed that.
Well, I looked, because there's credits, and I picked up a broke. There's credits for everybody else to build that except him.
No kidding.
And what really ticks us off, and we tried to get them, and gave them proof and photographs and everything, and it's never changed.
No kidding.
It's like, no, these are the guys that did this. And there's no mention of Roy DeWitt or Pioneer Log Cabin Company or Roscommon or nothing.
Wow, isn't that something?
So, which is okay.
Well, sure.
He's in heaven. He didn't need to buy any more space anyhow.
That's right. That's right.
But I always, during that process when we were trying to, I was looking for a payment, and I went through all of his ledgers and whatever, and I never could find where there had been an invoice or a receipt for anything up there. So I just assumed that was just another one of those things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's go. So we're in Indian River. Let's come down to Grayling now for the shot in the gun. 1959.
Again, I don't know why he got into that thing. I mean, his only experience with a restaurant had been at the Big Wheel, and then, but somehow or another and we did quite a lot of business, built quite a few cabins around, and knew a lot of people in the Grayling area.
How many
And
of your cabins do you think are on the river?
How about 100? Or I don't know. I mean,
Must
they're
be
all
a lot.
over
Yeah.
Carolina. After in that many years, there has to be.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
but anyhow, he brought it from the Trudgeon family, Roy Trudgeon, and I forget who else, but and it was pretty well run down and very outdated and whatever. And, had a little unattached bar next door that wasn't much.
I mean, people had to go out and around?
Well, yeah, the hotel, they didn't, I I think they had a little lunchroom. They didn't have much facilities. It was basically a lot of loggers stayed there and a lot of the railroad people. That was a big railroad terminal, and I know that a lot of the rooms were, I mean, they were nasty. You know, maybe 8 by 12 foot rooms. I mean, squeaky wooden floors, and it was a job.
And you gutted the whole thing?
Took,
Top to
oh
bottom?
God, oh yes,
Okay.
and
This was in 1959.
yes, that, like I said, that was right after I got home from the Army, and the old man says, here's a job for you. So I'm going to Florida, and so, but out behind there was a, and we had, you know, had the ideas of what we wanted to do, and he wanted to put an addition on it and expand some rooms upstairs, and so that we can change the hallway so we can make the rooms bigger and whatever. And there was what they called the annex out in the back parking lot, which he built a parking lot back there for his people with meters and the whole thing, because there wasn't enough city parking.
Your dad did?
Yeah, to provide adequate parking for that facility. And so and that had a basement in it. And it was just a ratty, and that was a lot of skiers stayed there. When they come up on the tours, on the ski tours from the train, and they'd drop them off in town, and then they had a shuttle from there out to the Grayling, which was Grayling Sports Park, which is Hanson Hills now. They would stay in this annex, downtown Grayling. Well, it had a basement in it. You know, it was a ratty kind of a old wooden building. So we tore that thing down and just dropped it into that basement and burned it. Told the town fathers what we were going to do, and set this thing on fire, and it did it blaze. Holy moly!
Do you have pictures of that?
No, I wish I, you know. None of us were. Dad used to take a lot of pictures, and then there was a period there that there's just not many pictures. But so we had a place to put all the debris that we tore out of the hotel, because it was all lath and plaster and all that. I mean, it was a mess, but it worked out really good, and it was a very good business for a while, well run, and it was managed by our cousin Arnie Maurin, because the gas station was at the Big Wheel was shutting down, and that business didn't need 2 people down there. I think the other partners stayed and operated that, and Arnie operated the hotel for the old man for a lot of years.
So did he still have that when he died?
No, he'd sold that to Theron White, who they own the building today. They'd sold the building. He was from Perrington, Michigan, had a propane gas business and a farm store. That's down by St. John's. And Theron did some nice improvements up there within the same, just kind of fixed up what we'd already had there. And then when he died, the 2 daughters sold it to the people who own it today. And then they thought it needed a lot of, so they did some really extensive remodeling and kitchen work and whatever. And instead of just trying to make some money first, you know, it's not operating because, and it's terrible. That's, you know, but in my opinion, if they'd have just ran the damn thing, it was adequate like it was, but it wasn't good enough for them. Now it's good enough for nobody. So it's too bad. It really is, because it was had a good reputation. And
Okay, and other projects you have in your little written thing here is the subdivisions.
Now, there's a number of subdivisions, you know,
Yeah.
I didn't want to go into a bunch of detail on those, but where I live out there, you know, River Forest is a nice subdivision.
Oh, yeah.
And that developed over a lot of years, and he and I owned part of that together, and whatever. And I moved out there. I was the first resident out there.
And what year was that?
1960, when Nancy and I got married, and then.
Had he had that property for logging purposes originally, or
No, just he.
investment or whatever?
Carl McNamara owned some other people owned some, and he just accumulated it, and again, why I don't, you know, and he never really, he never asked anybody's permission before he did this stuff. He didn't have to.
Maybe your mother.
I doubt if she knew until the bill came. Maybe you know, she didn't care. I mean, he always did well, and you know, there's got to be trust.
Sure.
So, anyhow, and I maintained the roads, and we had private roads for a long time, and I finally got sick and tired of all that stuff. I did that for years and years. I had a